So as we know, with solutions in Dataverse, we can do a lot of things, right? We can customize our data model, the visualization of that data. We can create tables and columns, forms and views, and we can build automation. So we can build Power Automate. We can build business rules and workflows and plugins. We can determine our security model. We can create roles and column security profiles. It's just the beginning, because with solutions we can do a lot, right? And so I'm going to show today is a preview feature that Microsoft's been working on called the native Git integration. So what that does is it takes your customizations from Dataverse, your solution. It uses a common open source technology called Git to take those customizations and put them into DevOps.
Yay.
And so that gives us source control of our changes to Dataverse, right? The other thing I'm going to show today is me using Visual Studio Code. That's a common IDE that a lot of developers use, and GitHub Copilot, which has native functionality built into VS Code to be able to interact with my source control. And based on the previous slide, seeing as I now have my Dataverse customizations as source control, I can now interact through VS Code using an agent to make changes or to get information out of my customization. Just a bit about me. If you want to connect with me, just LinkedIn. I've got a blog, cliveoldridge.com, and my GitHub. On my GitHub, I have a new project that I've started, which is all the prompts I'm going to show today. So feel free to go take my prompts. And what I've shown you before, Dataverse, you probably have access and a license, whatever, free to use. Comes for free when you've got an Azure tenant or limited licenses. Free to use, and GitHub Copilot, there's a limited use for free. I ended up paying for it $10 a month, so it's accessible. And the free version, you could do what I'm showing today. All right, go home, you can try it, and probably get similar results to me. So let's get into it. So to begin with, so that's going to be hard, isn't it? I'll just duplicate. It's all good. Yeah. Cool. So to begin with, this should be familiar to a lot of you. I've got a Dataverse environment, Dev1, and I've got a solution here, and it's got some customizations in it, right? I've got a table, I've got some web resources, some security roles. And you can see down here on the side, there's a source control preview. And when I go to that, previously I've come here, and when I first set up the solution, there was a bunch of changes. I click on commit, and that then pushes all of my changes here to my my Azure DevOps instance, right? And I've plumbed my solution to the source folder. You can see that there, the Git folder is source. So all of my customizations for my environment are here in the source folder. And what I then do is I clone it, right? And I say, I want to clone it in VS Code, very easy, couple of clicks. That ends up giving me code base here, right? I've got source folder, and inside my source folder, I've got all my customizations. Great. I've got my security roles. They're in YAML, right? So let me just close the agent for a second. You can see here I've got a read-only role, and it's applying these privileges, right? And so now I've got my customizations locally in my IDE, and it's in this YAML format. Microsoft very kindly have been working on the native Git integration to try and extract all of the information from Dataverse in as human readable a format as possible and as light as possible, right? So previously solutions were XML, and there'd be an open tag and a closing tag. It's verbose, right? It's a bunch of information that's not necessary.
Complicated.
Yeah, and the one thing that is a real benefit about this is because it's light and the files are smaller and it's more concise and it's more human readable, all of a sudden that means that language models become extremely effective at reviewing these files, reading these files, and actually also manipulating them.
User-friendly.
Yeah, so what I am using, there's a few things in here, so I'll take you along my journey. So I started sometime last week. We had a session, the four of us. We talked about what we're going to do, and I started using the base version of VS Code with the standard GitHub Copilot and the GPT model, and sucked. It was no good. I was not getting what I wanted out of it at all. It was unreliable. I'd do the exact same thing twice. I'd get different results. It wasn't automation, an average agent. And it was slow. So my interaction with it was I would ask it to do something within a file and it would do it relatively well, but it wouldn't have context of the rest of my code base. And then as I was using it, I started noticing some more features. So I could do things like I could chat with an extension. So I could talk to my terminal, to the workspace, or I could start attaching things, right? And I could attach my Git changes or the code base or a folder, right? So this gives me the ability to now start giving it more context, but also constrain that context because my source folder is big. It's got a dozen customizations in it. But if I only wanted to work on security roles, why don't I just give it the security roles folder and ask it to do something with my security roles? So as I started finding that if I give it just the right information, faster, and it gives me better results. And then I discovered more functionality where rather than just me talking to it within the chat, I can start giving it instructions about my project, about my code base, about where it is, about who it is. I can give it instructions and I can give it facts, the instructions. Like I imagine these like my global variables, right? The constants, the things that are not going to change, right? Like this code base contains Power Platform solution. It's YAML, not XML. That's a fact, right? It's something that I can give to the agent, and every time it's going through its logic, trying to make its decisions, it knows my instructions. And then with this a new preview feature as well in VS Code, it introduced this idea of prompt files. And these prompt files are just markdown. So if you're used to doing wikis or building in GitHub using the GitHub wikis or Azure DevOps wikis, that they're all in markdown, right? So it's very light, easy to read, easy to write. Hashtag for a heading and then a paragraph and a minus for a bullet point, right? It's really easy to author these, and you get nice preview functionality. So you can see, I can read my prompts as instructions that I can now give to my agent. And so what I've started doing is I've started building like a playbook, my library of prompts, right? So I'm saying, trigger these prompts if they're called by their name. And I've given each link a name: roles audit, security audit, flow review. And as you can see, I've gone down the rabbit hole. I just kept going. I was refining my prompts last night because I can't stop prompting. It's an addiction. Somebody has to stop me, please. And so I think what I'll do is I'll just start with the prompt. So I'll go to Copilot Edit, and I'm using the insider version of VS Code, which comes with agent mode. This is really important. And you'll see I'm using Claude Sonnet as my model. So
any particular reason? Or that just
Claude's better at everything. He's my boy. Like, if you want something done, you go to Claude. Yeah. Claude is slower, but if you give it the right context, it gives you the right result, and it gives you the same result every time you try. So some of the other models, they try and do things really quick, but they're a little bit schizophrenic. They'll go here one time and go there the other time. That's not what I want. What I want is reliability. I want to be able to ask for an audit, and doing an audit, you can't stuff that up. Like, I need it to be right. I'm trying to get my prompts down to really concise things for it to do. You can see I've attached my prompt. So you can attach your prompt, and because I've attached this prompt, and this prompt references other prompts, now all I need to do is attach one thing, and then I can ask for any of these. So ask for a role audit. You can see immediately, this is all the documentation it's read about auditing a role. Instantly, it's read 20 documents in a second, right? And now it's going to go along and perform a role audit. Now, while that's running, I'll show you how I taught it to do an audit. I've told it, you can find roles at this location, source roles. I said, there will be a folder per role, and here's an example of the structure. I need help finding changes to the code base that do not align with the following standards. Now, the reason I wanted to put this in here is because typically when you're delivering a project for a customer, there's some things that you want to make really clear, like when we communicate, this is the read-only role or this is the user role and a user cannot delete things. Those are important statements, right? So I might want to put those into my code base of customization, and rather than me having to give it to the security guy for him to do an audit to make sure that my roles still align with the principles as a business, I can just put those into a prompt and say, go run all of my rules across the entire code base and make sure that my customizations don't conflict with the agreed understanding that I have with my customer. So when I go sell a security role and I say it's going to be read-only, I can guarantee that because it's been reviewed by AI. And you'll see the prompt that I did, it's gone through and read and it's found some issues. It's found my read-only role gives create SharePoint and write to an array of tables. My user role has delete account, and it said, these do not align with the defined standards. Would you like me to make the corrections? Let's correct it. Fix my roles. Now, there's sometimes where I'm like, no, I don't want AI or I don't want a model to try and do something, right? Like if you find a security vulnerability in my code, maybe you don't try to fix that for me. But for removing things, taking things out of customizations, especially in roles, like me to help, yes. Sometimes it gets lost. Particularly with taking things out, like in these role files, it's just a couple of rows that it needs to take out. So it's easy for me to review and make sure it's got it right. And it's also easy for the model to not stuff it up.
So, for example, with your roles too, would you be going to your compliance and your policies?
Yeah, you define these prompts based on your policy, right? So your policy would feed into a set of prompts that you can then run.
Yeah.
And then me as a developer, I pull out all the customization. I run my prompts. I say, yep, code base looks good. Customization looks good. It aligns to your company policies. It's applying the edits now. It's done as it's now taken my read-only role. It's taken away create SharePoint privilege and the 3 write privileges it's found. I keep that. Now it's working on the next role that it's found. So now it's not only has it detected the fact that my security roles do not align to my company standards, it's now fixed them for me as well. And now it's going to go through and update my base user role, generating the edits. It's going to remove the non-system delete privilege. So I have a look at the edits that it's made. More people are using it. It's been getting slower through the week as more people find out.
Getting me.
People who have been deleted have changed their role. And
Everyone's now prompting.
yeah,
Cool. So it's going to go through my IDE. Maybe I need to plug
that's
in.
right. Yeah, there's something that might take hours.
You think about the life cycle of something like this. The time it takes for the person to be given the tasks, to then get logged in, to then go along and pull up the security role, and then apply the thinking to what they're seeing.
You've taken
Considering
3 minutes so far.
Cool. So it's removed the delete privilege. I'm happy with that. We're done. So that's my roles audit. Now, that got me on the idea that great, it was really good at finding the things, but actually now it can start doing things as well. Go to my next one. So I've got a security audit, right? So I could do a security audit. And it follows a similar kind of pattern, but this one is I've given it way more flexibility, right? Right? I've said, look at the code base for security standards. The only guide rail I gave it is, I think I said web resource somewhere. Oh, I need you to check web resources, right? When I give it a little bit more flexibility for things where, like, I don't know necessarily what the security vulnerability might be, right? Maybe I'm not the best security analyst for custom code. So I can give it a little bit of wiggle room. I can say, oh, just look for vulnerabilities. I can, because I've got my customization here, all of my code base, all of my web resources as raw JavaScript. Now, all of my developers' customizations for custom JavaScript can be reviewed by AI with a few words, code containing vulnerabilities, secrets, or passwords, and it finds some things. Actually, it's found more than I was even intending. So I gave it wiggle room. And so because I gave it wiggle room, one, it found the thing I thought it would find, which is I've found it hard-coded credentials in a JavaScript file. So have a look at that. Not wrong. My devs put their username and password into a JavaScript file. That's not good. So AI's found that for me. It's given me the opportunity to rectify that. Then it's also gone along and done something else. In one of my other prompts, I tell it about HTTP flows. I'll get to this later when I'm reviewing my flow JSON. And I've told it, hey, I don't like all HTTP flows that have anonymous access, right? It needs to be tenant level at a minimum. And it's found that. It said, trigger uses all authentication. So I just said not allowed to have anonymous HTTP flows. It's gone along and turned that into, I'll read the JSON, I'll find the trigger authentication type, and then it's interpreted that all is anonymous. So I gave it fuzzy information. It's taken that and found something that's actually a vulnerability within my customization. It's amazing. I go on. Next one that I'll do is flow review. And so this one is where I started to get some ideas about like knowledge, right? Where I can do these things. I can tell it where to find connection references, and that flows will be found at source and modern flows. And now I can start giving it examples of my development standard, right? I've got Patricia. She's amazing. She comes in, she'll do a Power Automate, and she'll do the right triggers. She'll name every action. She'll make the flow follow my good standards, right? She says it's got meaningful descriptions. Every action and trigger have descriptive names. It uses filters when querying Dataverse. And I give it an example of one of Patricia's flows. Here's Patricia's flow JSON. Here's Patricia's workflow YAML. And then I can go along and fabricate a bad one. I can go along and make a bad flow, and I extract that flow and I say, here's a flow that doesn't follow any of my standards. You can see here I said HTTP minimum tenant level. See, I didn't even say anonymous. I just said minimum is tenant level. And I tell it my connection references need to be in this format, and the trigger and actions need to have meaningful names. And I can just say rows audit. And it'll go along and it'll look at my good flow. It'll look at my bad flow. It'll use that as knowledge about what I want to get out of my flows. And then it'll look at the flows that have come out of my Dataverse that everyone's customized, and it'll apply these principles across the flows that have been made and find things for me, like things I never thought it would find. Let's come back and said, let me examine each flow. These are the good flows, the bad flows. Now let me look for some flows.
Sorry, this all runs within the context of your organization data, or is it shared?
So this is just an example from my example environment, the customization. prompts I've shared in my GitHub, which are just anyone can use.
When we use the solution components to, let's say, find the issue or fix the issues.
Yeah.
So when we use this specific model, like Cloud, for example,
Mhm.
so these are all within the context of because this cloud is hosted in the cloud, right? It's not within your.
Yeah, no, this is an Amazon data center somewhere.
Yeah. So when we use this model to components, it also means that we are exposing our data to the models, right?
Well, it depends on the model that you're using and their security policies and all of that. So yeah, this is something that I would use as long as you're allowed to use it and you've gone through the right due diligence to make sure that that model aligns with your company's policies and standards about sharing data. Might stop this one and just move on. Okay. So that's my flow example. What I might do is I'll do add privileges. Add privileges. I've created a prompt and I basically give it some context, right? I've literally gone and just taken a snippet out of the Microsoft documentation and said, hey, if you're adding privileges, you can create, read, write. You can have access levels at a global, deep, low. And I tell it the same kind of things, like roles go here, folder with role. Here's an example. And then I can give it a structure about how to take information in. I say, hey, by the way, my customer likes providing changes to security roles as a table, an Excel spreadsheet maybe. They want it to be in this format. And so I can just say add privileges and spell it terribly. It'll read this prompt, it'll read the documentation, it'll look at the format that I want my input in, follow the prompt. Please prompt the user for a role to be modified and ask for a table of permissions to apply. Once the permissions have been applied, a summary of the changes made for the clincher. After any role modification, always run the audit. Now I can have a fuzzy interface to provide roles, make the changes to the customization, and then I can get my company's policies to be applied across the changes I've just asked for. So it's asking me, please provide the name of the role and the table of the privileges. So I'll just grab my example from here, my sample. See, it's pretty simple. It's just asking for user role. Ask for user role, account privileges. I want global, global, basic, user, global, global, global. Finding my role, YAML file to edit. You can see sometimes it'll apologize. It'll say, hey, sorry, I got a little bit lost. Sometimes it'll iterate a few times. So if you pay close attention to the output that it gives you, and you use that as feedback back into your prompts, you'll find that your prompts get a lot better. So the first time I was trying to do this, I would say, what are my roles? And I wouldn't tell it where roles are or what file it is or what path it's in. And it would still get there, but it would take 3, 4, 5 iterations, right? It would try and it would fail. Then it would try and search the code base and fail. Then it would look at the folder structure and start succeeding. It would find a folder called roles. Then it would find the YAML file with the role. And then if I go along and take the things that it tells me, the paths it's taking, I can shortcut those paths, right? So rather than failing 3 times, I could just tell you where the folder is. And then the iterations become less, right? It only has to do it once. Something stopped. But you can see it's applied the privileges. It's added all of those rows to my role, right? What would have happened if it didn't cut out because of the internet? It would have then run the audit and it moves the delete account privilege because user roles can't delete. Do that. Undo all my changes. So my next one, that's adding roles. Okay, so the next bit I started playing around with was bits of documentation. Like I know we've all been there, documentation. Nobody wants to do documentation, right? And the thing is with this, you might never actually have to do it again. So that's one of the jobs I would like it to take from me. Thank you. Yeah, you can have the documentation. And so what I've started to do with this one is I told it to read my roles. I want it and format the roles like this. I've given it the same kind of table structure I want. I said format MISC privileges as you see best. I don't really care about the miscellaneous ones, but I want you to put it in this folder, wiki/asbuilt/security. So I'll say.
You've got traceability of what you've done.
Yeah. So document the privileges. It'll find this prompt. Network issues. And so the thing that's special about this one is I started getting ideas about, okay, that's really good at my customization for Dataverse. I could get everything into this code base. It could do anything. It could do everything. I just need to get everything into this mono repo, and Claude can live for me. And so what I started trying was often a lot of customers or companies or individuals, they'll use Azure DevOps to do their wiki, right? So like in here, I've got my wiki, and you can have wikis that are code first, right? That are linked to a repo. So you can see here I've linked my wiki to dev1 repo, and I've given it a folder, which is the wiki folder. And now I can ask Claude to document my security roles, document whatever I want him to document, write it into a wiki in Markdown. Just so happens he's proficient in Markdown. And then I commit my changes, and my wiki has all my documentation. It's read my security roles, formatted them in a specified template. Sometimes it even runs the audit after doing the documentation, and it's just like, hey, let me double check to make sure that the roles don't have something that we shouldn't have put in there. So then I started trying to take it a little bit further beyond just getting information out. And I started trying to give it specific skills. So things like, my laptop's dying. So what I started doing was trying to build some more complex processes into it. So like gave it I'd do is I'd go to Dataverse, I would add a web resource, and then I would commit that to Git, and I would look at the changes in Git. And I'd see, oh, when I add a web resource, Dataverse does a set of things, right? It adds a row and root components, it adds a solution component, it then adds two files, a YAML file and a JavaScript file, right? And so I found that I could then break down that task and provide this as something that it knows how to do. You now know how to add a web resource, and then I can teach it how to add the event for that web resource, so I can bind my web resource onto the form. And I started to push it a little bit further, and I would say just deliver requirements. So I would create a folder called requirements, and I'd have a folder called drop, and I'd drop a requirement in. Say, hey, as a user, when I open the model main form, I have JavaScript with a web resource onload function, then I wanted to do these things like onload, progress indicator, 15 seconds, prompt the user, like something that's complex enough. And then I tell the prompt, I tell it, requirements are here, process each one based on prompts available, move it to the dead folder, and then check if there's any more requirements in that folder. Now I'm thinking I can just create a PowerShell script that calls DevOps, gets all my user stories, drops them in the drop folder, let the agent iterate for, I don't know, a week. How long do you let him iterate for? And then he will deliver my requirements. And then it's up to me to just review the changes, push them back into Dataverse, and test them. It works.
You actually tried it?
Yeah. Yeah.
How long did it take to work?
Than the average user.
So, like, to be honest, it's been really reliable all week. Like, I would give it a 90+%. This morning I started having issues, like some stuff moved around. And I think I've got issues with my internet. Keep getting network. I just need a yeah, see one. I'm on the DXC network. Oh my God.
DXC, that's the problem.
And pay the bill. Yes, Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Or connect.
Microsoft case there.
Copilot is clairvoyant. I had it writing C# for me last year.
Very
It was crazy.
Very. But what we first built.
No documentation.
Deliver requirement. So it's read my it's found a requirement file. Read it. I found a requirement. Add a web resource. So another requirement. First, I'll add a new web resource for the model entity. So now this is where it starts getting a little bit creepy, right? Because this agent in this IDE has access to your terminal. So in my prompts even, I can say, hey, Git, this is how you commit to Git. This is how you use the pack CLI. And so the more I do that, like this is how you run npm, it can start interacting with things beyond my code base. It can start running things on my terminal that can then go do other things, right? Like go query an API and drop a file here with the JSON from that file, and then use that the next time you iterate to do something else. I'll continue. So it's generating a GUID. It could probably generate a GUID itself, but because I've said generate a GUID, it's like, hey, it needs to be super unique. So rather than me trying to fabricate one, I'll use a system tool that's going to be more reliable. And then it'll go through the instructions that I put in the thing is, it by itself has changed together the fact that to deliver this requirement, it needs to follow 2 prompts. So I didn't tell it that, it's just figured that out. Then, so because I've taught it how to do a web resource and an event binding, it's figured out, okay, I need to create the web resource first. So it's writing the JavaScript for me. And then it's going to add the bits to the YAML files that it needs to add. Yeah, now it's generating the web resource file for me. And then it'll try and bind it to the form as well. So now it's going to do root components, and then it'll do solution components. It was my internet. Better now. So I've just accepted those 3, and it's going to keep going. Now it's doing solution components. Yeah, it was the internet. It's going to add a row right at the bottom for my new web resource.
We'll have
Right.
So you updated the wiki, asked to generate the requirement, and with that you generate the JavaScript. Created the solution.
Yeah, so I'll show you the changes in a second. Now it's because in my requirement I said the model main form. I've taught it how to find entities and forms. It now knows, okay, cool. I'll find the model table. Within that, there'll be a form folder. Within that will be a main folder, and then it finds the right form, the main form. And because I taught it how to add an event, it goes along now. It's reading the web resource to figure out what event to bind, and then it'll update my form to actually do the event binding. Now I don't need to go to a model-driven app to go to the form designer to say bind this event. I just need to articulate it, put it into a user story, get the user story to sync to an agent, and have that deliver the requirement for me. So now it's moving the drop to dead. So I've delivered all your requirements. See if it did well. It has a web resource, which is model form, got a form on load, and it has put it onto my form.
Wow.
I missed a bit, maybe. Cancel it too. I canceled it too soon. So it's created a web resource for me. YAML, I got the web resource. It added the solution component. It's added the root component. Almost. I'll give it 50%. But now the thing about this is it did it 50% this time, and I was able to recognize that. I could just say, hey, you missed something. It'll do that bit that it missed, right? So I just need to iterate again.
Well done.
I think that's it. Yeah, that's my
Awesome.
Scary, mate.
Yeah, this week I've kind of been battling with like this whole existential kind of thing that's been running around in my mind after experiencing this. But
I've been feeding my family with this for the last 13 years, man.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
they're trying to take that away from me.
no, like I see myself still being a part of the picture and interacting with it. I hope
I've got to click OK.
until it decides otherwise. Like, we're still like happy participants, but I see my interaction with Dataverse is going to be much like very different, right? I don't think I'd be spending as much time in the UI. I'll be spending more time in here. You imagine somebody says, "Oh, add 100 fields to a table." Now it's do that in minutes, right? Whereas before I'd give that to someone that spend a day, click, 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 click. They get carpal tunnel syndrome and then take time off work and then they'd be sick and would miss out to deadlines. But now, like our interaction with it is refining the data, refining the prompts, viewing the output, up with the requirements in the first place. Yeah, cool. Place for us for now.
Very much old school was like, you had a solution, export it, do your tweaks, put it back. No, it didn't work. Put it back, try again. Yep. So antiquated, take it hours. Now we're talking like seconds.
Yeah.
You've actually not only updated it, but you've refined it and it knows what to do next time. Mind blown.
And it gets better. Like it just keeps getting better. It's kind of incremental. So like once you've taught it about where it is and that it's Power Platform and it's this code base and you've set the parameters, then that bit's done. You never have to do that again, right? Until something changes externally that dictates that you might need to change the rules. But
security wise, though, you'd have to be pretty top of level security to be able to do that.
yeah,
To be fair.
you need to review the output. You still need to put enough due diligence to be confident with it, but it does all the grunt work, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Mind blown.
Oh yeah, what's the question, Clive?
So do you see the world of functionals and devs kind of converging in this in terms of Power Platform work, or do you see devs kind of moving to this type of
We'll do
model?
this. Microsoft will give you agents that do this, but you just don't see the fact that it's doing the exact same thing.
That's what plan designers do.
Yeah, plan design is doing this, right? Just modifying the same things.
We all get to have a rock star life.
Yeah. What is the possibility of rollback? Like
Well, source control. So sometimes it does stuff up, and I try and I go to my Dataverse instance, and I'll say check for updates, and I'll say, hey, there's some components that have changed. Sometimes things will be a little misaligned, and it will tell me. But because it's source control, like the whole history is right here, so I can literally just revert a commit, and my mistakes are as if they never happened.
Can you use the prompting techniques to reverse commit?
Yeah. One of the guys I work with, he's using it to do cherry picks, and it figures out exactly what needs to be in that commit perfectly. Yeah.
That's a question from Nadraj.
Oh yeah. What's the question? And then generating a table or visualize. So like some of the models are really unreliable. The thing about Claude is it's slower but much more reliable. Like I got tired of trying to audit its output. Like the security role one, it comes out with a table, and there's like a decent amount of roles in there, right? And I would go through and I'd compare, like, has it stuffed up? Is one of these not in here, but it's in the wiki, or something in the wiki that's not in here? And I got sick of trying to check whether it was right or wrong, because it was always right. So the right model with need to constrain the context enough. So if the context is too wide, you'll get variable results. But if you can say this file, this YAML, focus on that, do the specific thing, it does it. Yeah.
From CI/CD pipelines or kind of stuff, like automating this, like all your prompts, or it's your and you are on leave or something, who's going to do that?
Well, the thing about the prompts, the thing I like about the prompts is I first started with let me just get information out. And then I started thinking on, like, we should be creating prompts to give to our prompters, right? Like, me as a good lead, if I'm not giving my devs decent prompts, I'm doing them a disservice, right? Like, I should be providing a foundation of good prompts, right? Could you automate it? Yes. There's APIs for all of the different ones. The thing that you probably wouldn't get is the interface between you and the agent, right? Like that is quite key. Let it do an iteration, and then you interpret the output, and then you tell it to do another one or to change something, right? And if you don't have that interaction, or that interaction is too slow, then you don't get like viable results out of it. But because it does something for 13 seconds, and you say, yeah, that's good or bad, then it does something for 13 seconds, you can just do a lot more. So
Why I'm asking is like mainly based on the audits example is like the solution checker.
Yeah.
So you see in the pipelines, you can say like, okay, if the solution checker has a critical errors of 5 or 6, you can just stop it. So
yeah, you could absolutely do that.
okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't be you use the same model. You use Claude and the Anthropic API, or any one of the APIs, but then you would have to build something to say, hey, here's a set of files, or here's a code base. Please review these things.